Since the revelations about the spying activities of the NSA and other intelligence services, the world is shocked by the fact that the United States, but also European governments, screen, filter and store all our personal internet traffic. The good news is that the opposite is also true. Large sets of data, big data, are accessible to anyone who knows how to get there. Data mining, this is called. Backlight is putting it to a test and is going fishing in that sea of data. Our story starts with an intriguing newspaper article. Royal Dutch Shell owes the Iranian government $1 billion. What has happened here? Isn't there a trade embargo against Iran? This is what you will see.
You can interrogate the company in new ways without them actually knowing. You're looking over their shoulder, looking at lots of different information sources to learn things about it that they don't know that you know.
Sanctions are always a wonderful way to get into a James Bond atmosphere.
Shell is een bedrijf dat denkt op lange termijn. En zij hebben in hun lange geschiedenis de ervaring, regimes komen en regimes gaan. Dictaturen komen, dictaturen gaan.
This is Backlight. Welcome in the database. To learn how an investigative journalist can use digital sources, we visit Kenneth Cookier, data journalist at The Economist, and author of Big Data, a revolution that will transform how we live, work and think.
Typically in journalism, what we did is we handled the information overload by writing stories about it and taking the world and crafting it and forming it into a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. And it was very anecdote-based. Now, data journalism shifts this. It's actually a quite interesting rupture historically. What's happening is we're now realizing that there's obviously limits to what the individual can know, and those perceptions are sometimes faulty. We have a new tool in the toolkit. It won't replace our discrimination, but it's a new sort of appendage with which we can work, and that is to look at the data, trust it, and try to find new stories based on it. So instead of interviewing a person, let's interview a database. This new tool is going to help us see beyond the horizon that we normally can't see.
Let's try this out. Our starting point is a small article on the internet. Royal Dutch Shell is trying to pay off a debt of over $1 billion to the Iranian regime. What's going on here? Step 1, we call Shell. But the press officer quickly explains that Shell's relationship with Iran is too delicate. And therefore, the company will not comment on camera. The Iran file is a delicate subject for Shell, because just as the call for sanctions grew louder in the late 1990s, the biggest company in the world was about to make a huge investment in the country, worth billions of dollars.
In journalism, as was practiced up until now, you would knock on lots of doors and some of those doors would open, but a lot of time those doors simply would not open. You would turn around, sullen-faced, and walk away. Now you walk away and you go to your computer and you look at the database and you can interrogate the company in new ways without them actually knowing. You're looking over their shoulder, looking at lots of different information sources to learn things about it that they don't know that you know, or that they've put out for one purpose that you can repurpose in a different way.
We assemble a team of investigative journalists, programmers and data analysts. By using digital sources, we hope to find answers to the following questions. How is it possible that Shell has an outstanding balance with the Iranian regime? And what was Shell doing in a country that has been labeled a rogue state by the US and is subject to international sanctions? For the past 12 years, investigative journalist Marcel Metzer has been studying the modus operandi of Shell.
Dat is dus de Shellcast. Hier staat de grote Gerritson, 5 delen, die de eerste decennia beschrijven. Hier wat biografieën. Hier een geheim dossier, wat ik van een oud Shell-medewerker heb gekregen.
How would he characterize the company?
Je kan Shell op meerdere manieren typeren, maar de manier waarop ik het in ieder geval benader is als een hele politieke organisatie. Die bezig is voortdurend met het leggen van verbindingen met overheden, met diplomaten, met geheime diensten, met legers, militairen dus. En dat moeten ze doen omdat dat de enige manier is waarop je die productie van energie, dus van olie en gas, kan doen. Eigenlijk is dat altijd zo geweest, moet ik zeggen. Want van het begin af aan, als je de geschiedenis van Shell bekijkt, zie je dus dat het heel nauw verweven is met macht, staatsmacht.
The WikiLeaks cables, published on the internet a few years ago, are an ideal source for a look behind the scenes at a closed oil giant like Shell. It's one of those big data files. We're talking about 1.2 million leaked documents, including 250,000 diplomat cables. For his research, Marcel Metze also went through these cables.
Nou, dat zijn dus 250.000 berichten van Amerikaanse ambassadeurs, consuls-generaal, die ze dan sturen aan het ministerie van Buitenlandse Zaken, State Department, maar ook aan een aantal collega's en ook aan de geheime diensten. Daarin doen ze dus onder meer ook verslag van hun contacten met allerlei bedrijven.
What can we find about Shell and Iran in the WikiLeaks cables? We run them through a search engine. When we type in Shell, within seconds we find some 2,000 cables. Searching for Shell and Iran yields 329 cables, dating from May 2003 to December 2010.
In die periode speelde vooral de kwestie van de mogelijke ontwikkeling van het nucleaire programma van Iran. En de Amerikanen hadden sancties opgelegd. Ja, dat betekent dus voor Shell een probleem.
The sanctions against Iran. How did they come about? After the Islamic Revolution of 1979, in which the Shah was deposed and succeeded by religious leader Ayatollah Khomeini, all Western oil companies are expelled from Iran. With the Shah gone, the US lost its ally and any influence it had in the country. As retaliation for holding American citizens hostage in the embassy in Tehran, the US called for a trade embargo. Since then, the US has constantly turned up the pressure. Looking for the driving force behind the increasing pressure on Iran, we come across an organization in Washington under the innocent name Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Turns out to be a fanatical conservative lobby group.
U.S. sanctions against Iran really date back over 30 years. They were imposed after the Islamic Revolution in 1979, when U.S. diplomats were taken hostage, and U.S. sanctions turned into a U.S. embargo on Iran.
In 1995, the US Congress passes an act making it harder for European companies to do business with Iran.
Those international energy companies who continue to do business in Iran would face significant problems in the United States in investing in the American energy sector, in accessing American financing, in getting the legislative and political concessions they need in order to be successful here. Life would be very difficult for them.
In the diplomat cables, we find threatening letters that the American stock market watchdog, the SEC, sent to several European companies in 2008. To find out what this meant for Shell, we first have to go to Spain. Journalist Miguel Jimenez, together with a team of investigative journalists, searched the 250,000 diplomat cables released by WikiLeaks. He comes across something remarkable.
Bueno, estuvimos unas cuantas semanas encerrados en un sótano del periódico, sin que el resto de la redacción no sabía lo que estábamos haciendo. De hecho, había todo tipo de rumores sobre qué estábamos haciendo, si estábamos diseñando un nuevo proyecto para el periódico y cosas así. Y estábamos durante, yo diría que 2 meses aproximadamente, antes de empezar a publicar el primero de los documentos.
Jiménez discovers that the Spanish energy company Repsol came under extreme pressure from the SEC to end the large-scale project they were setting up in Iran.
La carta era en un tono relativamente agresivo porque hacía esas advertencias sobre los inversores institucionales de Estados Unidos, algunos de los cuales habían dicho que no iban a invertir nunca en empresas que tuvieran negocios en Irán. Y entonces el tono era hasta cierto punto amenazante o como mínimo con advertencias duras sobre el riesgo para la reputación de la compañía que podía tener el hecho de tener inversiones.
But Repsol wasn't acting alone in Iran. We learned from the cables that Shell too came under pressure from the SEC to disclose a contract worth billions of dollars it planned to sign with the Iranian government together with Repsol. The contract pertained to a project to exploit and prepare for export the enormous gas reserves off the coast of Iran. It would make Iran one of the biggest gas producers in the world.
Repsol con Shell tenía un proyecto llamado South Pars en el que Repsol tenía una participación también le llaman Persian LNG o South Pars, en el que Repsol tenía una participación del 25%, Shell otro 25% y el Estado iraní el 50% restante. De lo que se trataba es hacer una gran planta de licuefacción para poder exportar gas desde Irán al resto del mundo.
We consult Wikipedia. South Pars North Dome is the biggest gas field in the world, according to experts. It's located under the Persian Gulf, right on the border between Qatar and Iran. The gigantic field contains approximately 51 trillion cubic meters of gas, about a quarter of the world's gas reserves. The field is strategically located between Europe and Asia, so the gas can be transported in multiple directions, either through pipelines in Turkey and Turkmenistan, or by tankers to both the European and Asian markets. The American pressure on Shell and Repsol to abandon their billion-dollar investment in Iran made the headlines in Spain. No one picked it up in the Netherlands. We find the author of the article that led us down this track, Benoit Faucon, reporter for financial press agency Dow Jones. We ask him what Iran means to Shell.
But Iran has the second largest natural gas reserves in the world. This has the potential to be another Russia, basically. So for Shell, that was the perfect location. You have to invest in Iran if you want to develop gas.
Under here, there are gigantic reserves of natural gas, the cleanest fossil fuel around. Over there, a country with next to no natural energy resources of its own.
The thing is, between here and there are 11,000 kilometers of ocean.
Getting one to the other used to be next to impossible.
Until they thought of this.
You chill it to minus 160 degrees Celsius, it shrinks. You stick it in here. And then you go for a sail.
You have a situation where, in the late 90s and early 2000s, you had a president that was considered liberal, Khatami. And there was a sense that it was really acceptable in terms of the public opinion and the US government to invest in Iran. So at that stage, a lot of Western European companies stepped in and started to really develop projects there. But the key commitment at that stage was basically this integrated project of gas extraction, which then would have been integrated into an LNG export scheme. So, which was exactly right for Shell.
Vandaag was de officiële opening door koningin Beatrix. Maar de afgelopen tijd brachten de eerste LNG-tankers hun lading al aan de Rotterdamse wal.
In deze opslagtanks kan straks vloeibaar aardgas terechtkomen vanuit de hele wereld. En daarom vindt ook de overheid dit zo'n belangrijk project. Want het maakt ons in de toekomst minder afhankelijk van landen waarmee we via pijpleidingen verbonden zijn.
So this was a perfect project for Shell to leverage this experience. But it was obviously the wrong time and wrong place.
While Shell and Repsol start working on South Pars, the political wind in Iran shifts. In 2005, the liberal president Khatami is replaced by his conservative opponent Ahmadinejad, who starts an ambitious nuclear program.
Begin deze maand meldden Iraanse media dat het land een tweede verrijkingsfabriek in gebruik heeft genomen.
The call for tighter sanctions now grows louder, led by a fanatical lobby in the US. The idea is a slow choke to force Iran to its knees.
ملت ایران سر سوزنی از حق خودش عقب نشینی نخواهد کرد.
Who is behind this lobby that apparently has the power to put pressure on a big European company like Shell? We find this website.
We will extend a hand if you are willing to unclench your fist.
In return, Iran's ruthless regime offered more nuclear testing, and now more violence and murder. Shamefully, some multinational corporations continue to do business in Iran, providing the Ayatollah with technology and money. Go to www.uani.com to find out who they are and how to stop them, to make the world a safer place.
On UANI's website, we find an impressive list of names, including the late diplomat Richard Holbrooke, former CIA Director James Woolsey, and former Mossad Director Meir Dagan. In UANI's headquarters at Rockefeller Center in New York, we speak with spokesman and former ambassador to the UN, Mark Wallace.
When we started United Against Nuclear Iran in 2008, we said that we were going to engage, and we couldn't say this publicly at the time because this sounds aggressive, and I don't mean it in that aggressive way. But we wanted to engage in an economic war, to use the tools of economic pressure to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, to replace pen and ink and internet data with bullets and bombs. And we felt that we could be a private group engaging in that economic pressure in a way where governments couldn't act or wouldn't act in a quick enough manner to use modern communications to convince companies to change their behavior.
UANI increases the pressure by writing a letter to Shell CEO Peter Voser, demanding full disclosure about the company's activities in Iran.
Dear Mr. Voser, we are writing to call your attention to a very serious issue involving deficiencies in your company's public filings.
The correspondence between UANI and Shell learns that UANI threatens to delist Shell from the London and New York stock exchanges if the company doesn't meet its demands.
In the event Royal Dutch Shell continues its business operations in Iran and fails to adequately disclose the risks of such business, United Against Nuclear Iran will pursue appropriate legal action against Shell, will call on the New York Stock Exchange and the London Stock Exchange to delist Royal Dutch Shell, and will assist the many Royal Dutch Shell shareholders who oppose Royal Dutch Shell's activities in Iran.
There are still international energy companies who've decided that Iran is too big a market, too lucrative a market, that they're willing to take the risk. There are other companies who believe that the United States won't sanction them, that they're too important. They're from countries that are too big, too large, where there'll be too much diplomatic blowback, that they've been willing to try and take that risk.
I think Shell needs to come clean. I think Shell should publicly declare exactly the nature of its Iran business and what its plans are to that Iran business.
UANI starts an aggressive lobby campaign. Now Shell's shareholders also start to be concerned. What is Shell doing in Iran?
but if you put all these elements together, you've got a cycle. The forced disclosure means you're going to have more pressure from the shareholders. The more they know, the more they put pressure. And therefore, the combination together will make it more difficult.
We learned from the cables that several European companies still active in Iran are put under pressure by the US. Their message is clear. It's no longer business as usual.
The US government has a very extensive information gathering network, both a diplomatic network with embassies and consulates everywhere in the world, with commercial officers who are on the ground monitoring the business there. They've got obviously a very extensive intelligence apparatus with 16 intelligence agencies who have sources and access globally. The U.S. Treasury Department began rolling out a series of very important financial sanctions. The U.S. State Department became more aggressive in reaching out to international energy companies. And you had U.S. administration officials fanning out around the globe to talk to the CEOs and executives of these major companies, from financial institutions, energy companies, major insurers, reinsurers, shipping companies, just to communicate a very fundamental message, and that is that they were putting their businesses at risk because they were dealing with an Iranian regime that was using the money, using some of the technology to build a nuclear weapons program, a ballistic missile program, and to fund international terrorism.
But what is their hidden agenda? It's easy to say it's not allowed to trade with Iran when you no longer have financial interests in the country. But what other motives could play a part in this effort to outplay European players from the Iranian market? In the great game for strategic oil and gas reserves, there is a whole web of interests.
The world is a complex place. We're learning more about the complexity because we now have data with which to quantify the complexity. And as a result, we need new tools with which to make sense of it. It was an easier time when you could have had Thucydides looking at the Peloponnesian Wars and thinking about what it means to be a raconteur of past events. But today, that's not good enough. We need to, the issues that we're dealing with are far more complex, that it surpasses the ability of any one person to see 360 degrees all of what's happening. So what we need to do is tap into the data and use these new tools with which to do that, and then sit back and tell the story as we normally tell the story.
In the diplomat cables, we read that there was heavy diplomatic contact about Iran from 2007 until 2010 between Washington and various European capitals. The Americans paid frequent visits to The Hague too. We find a cable that points to a meeting that took place on March 20, 2008, between an official from the US State Department and a Dutch representative from Shell, Simon S. A quick search on LinkedIn reveals his profile, which states that he used to be a high-ranking civil servant at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We search for other cables that mention his name and discover that he was seconded to Shell as government relations advisor from 2006 until 2008. After his time at Shell, he returned to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, now in a higher ranking capacity. It turns out Shell has a special department, the Government Relations Group, that specializes in maintaining relations with governments in difficult regions. We continue our search on LinkedIn to see if we can find other people who mention working for Shell's Government Relations Group. A host of names pops up on our screen. All are high-ranking civil servants who work for Shell for several years before returning to senior positions at various ministries and embassies around the world. and vice versa. We show our findings to Marcel Metzer.
Ja, ik vind dit wel een mooi beeld. Dit laat eigenlijk precies zien hoe breed en diep die verbindingen eigenlijk zijn van Shell met de politiek en met de overheden. Je komt voortdurend je kabels tegen waarin dan een soort standaards in staat. Er is regelmatig contact tussen Shell en de Nederlandse overheid over de stand van zaken rond Iran. Er is ook veel contact met de Europese Commissie en de Amerikaanse overheid hierover. Dus de kabels, dat is een zin die komt voortdurend terug in meerdere kabels. Dus dat is een continu proces.
Maar is het niet vreemd dat een ambtenaar van een ministerie ook optreedt namens één specifiek bedrijf?
Dat is volstrekt normaal. Dat heeft helemaal met de aard van het bedrijf te maken. Er zijn dus allerlei terreinen waarop ze gewoon elkaar nodig hebben. Het wordt al wat moeilijker als mensen gaan overstappen van overheid naar bedrijfsleven en soms ook weer teruggaan. Dan wordt het al wat onduidelijker wiens taal ze eigenlijk spreken en wiens belang ze eigenlijk dienen. Bij detachering kun je je toch wel gaan afvragen. Want dan komen die twee petten wel heel erg dicht naast elkaar te liggen. En misschien zitten ze dan wel bovenop elkaar.
En wat zou dat betekenen dan?
Dat je niet meer zeker weet, als er een verschil is tussen die belangen van de staat en het bedrijf, welk belang gediend wordt door de betreffende persoon. Daar kan dus een probleem ontstaan. Maar bovendien kan het ook nog eens een keer zijn dat de wijze waarop de overheid en de politiek zijn belang percipieert, dat nog wel eens een keer sterk beïnvloed kan zijn door de beelden die het bedrijf als het ware daarin kan leggen.
To what extent did the Dutch government consider the interests of Shell in determining a position on Iran?
Dit is dus een kabel die komt uit Den Haag. Dus die is door de Amerikaanse ambassade hier in Den Haag gemaakt, 21 december 2006. The Dutch government supports targeted sanctions against Iran, but not actions that limit Shell's activities there. Dat is een hele duidelijke uitspraak. We zijn voor de sancties, maar niet als ze de activiteit van Shell in Iran beperken.
Wasn't the Netherlands a loyal ally of the US and declared proponent of the sanctions against Iran?
Nederland schaart zich achter het Franse standpunt over mogelijke Europese sancties tegen Iran.
Mocht er geen aanscherping komen van de sancties in VN-verband, dan vind ik dat we als Europese Unie gezamenlijk met de Verenigde Staten moeten komen tot aanscherping van de sancties bovenop het VN-pakket.
Als we kijken naar het nieuwsbeeld in die tijd, dan zien wij een minister van Buitenlandse Zaken die voor de camera's zegt op dat moment: Nederland schaart zich achter het aanscherpen van de sancties tegen Iran.
Ja.
Terwijl uit deze kabels blijkt dat Nederland zich helemaal niet schaart achter het aanscherpen van de sancties. Ja, sterker nog, die pleit juist voor een soepeler interpretatie van die sancties.
Wat je hier in de kabels Nederland ziet doen, dat is dus eigenlijk zeggen van formeel staan we achter de sancties, maar we willen een uitzondering voor Shell. Dat is wat ze eigenlijk zeggen. Dus de minister, als hij tegenover de Tweede Kamer of tegenover de pers zegt wij staan achter de sancties, dan spreekt hij de waarheid. Hij zegt alleen niet bij dat hij de uitzonderingspositie voor Shell wil. Tenminste, dat heb ik nooit gehoord, dat hij dat gezegd heeft. En dat vind je wel in de kabels.
Kun je je voorstellen dat de minister voor de bühne iets anders zegt dan binnenskamers in dit geval?
Wat ik me kan voorstellen, en daar zijn ze dus handig genoeg in, de politici, dat ze weliswaar hetzelfde zeggen voor de camera als binnenskamers, maar dat ze niet alles zeggen wat ze voor de camera zeggen wat ze binnenskamers zeggen. En dat is in dit geval dus ook gebeurd. Dat ene stukje van wij willen een uitzonderingspositie voor Shell, dat kan je gewoon weglaten. Dan spreek je geen onwaarheid. En zo werkt het natuurlijk. Want je moet altijd, als je je verantwoordt tegenover de Tweede Kamer, liegen mag niet. Iets weglaten, dat is al wat makkelijker.
Dat is geen liegen.
Dat is iets weglaten.
Then we unexpectedly receive new information by email. A file containing over 200 pages. Fixture lists. We have no idea what they are.
You sent me this list of... What is this list about?
Oh,
I didn't understand what
shipping
it was.
databases. You find them all the time. So basically, it's a list of fixtures where Shell was the so-called charterer. So basically, it was the owner of the content of tankers.
And why was that so interesting to you to study this list?
Because we wanted to know who were the buyers of Iranian oil. This was the most sensitive, possibly sensitive information at the time, or knowing who was the, in the time of international isolation for Iran, whose friends were still there. Because the bottom line to this is whoever was buying oil from Iran was obviously ensuring that the government remained afloat. Say probably 5 years earlier or 10 years earlier, nobody would have cared about the tanker leaving Iran that would have been chartered by Shell. It would be business as usual. But then because of the spotlight becoming stronger, everyone would have been looked in depth. And suddenly every cargo became a story.
We find an article that mentions a ship called the Front Page, a supertanker that visited an Iranian oil port in 2010, chartered by Shell.
I was interested in which companies were still doing business with Iran. And I was particularly interested in companies that were like, brand name, well-known companies. And I was interested in who was still purchasing Iranian oil.
Stephen Steklow, investigative journalist at Reuters, analyzed the Front Page voyage by comparing various data files from the shipping industry.
Unfortunately, the oil trading business is highly secretive. All the companies consider their trades confidential, proprietary.
The most important list he received from a secret source in the oil industry.
So this was a list that was provided to me by a very good source for the month of March 2010. And on the crude list, one of the ship's names that came up again and again over a period of time was a ship called the Front Page, which the record showed had purchased something called South Pars condensate, which is an Iranian oil product, sometimes called light crude, that can be used in refining gasoline. And the client, the company who was listed as the purchaser, was a company called Stasco, which I wasn't familiar with, but I quickly figured out that was a company that was connected to Shell.
Tankies? Geen tankies, nee, dit zijn straatjes. Ja, bewolking, daar hebben we toch niks aan.
In New York, we find the Dutchman John van Schaik, bureau chief for the specialized information agency Energy Intelligence, who knows everything about ship tracking.
Sanctions are always a wonderful way to get into a James Bond atmosphere, and I suppose the Iranians are kind of using their humor as well. They let vessels, supertankers, show up the one day off the west coast of Africa, and the next day at Singapore, and the next day off the coast of China, and the day after off the coast of Sri Lanka. So that vessel is kind of a Flying Dutchman going all wild over the seas.
From his office in Manhattan, Van Schaik keeps track of all the shipping movements in the Persian Gulf, and especially of the Iranian fleet.
These are satellite images, and this is Bandar Abbas, which is the bunker fuel port from Iran, off Iran. And so here you see some oil tanks. So they pump it to Ks, and here you see tankers. This probably is a tanker, yep. And so here you see, for example, that this tanker might be lying here and buying its bunker fuel from this smaller tanker.
But this is how close you can get.
Right.
Zooming in.
You can spend all
details.
day. You can spend all day just figuring out. The satellites themselves get so close that you can figure out the brand name of the cigarette the guy is smoking. See, what the Iranians try to do is they try to disguise where they sent their ships. So what they've done over time is they've changed the names of vessels, they changed their flags, they tried to disguise everything. But as one US official said to me, he said, it's a little bit silly, they're repainting their ships and giving them names as if we are looking from this. Look, we're looking from above, of course. So satellites. They perfectly know, the Americans perfectly know where all the vessels are. Kijk. Tankies. Kijk, dat is Port of Fujairah, yeah. So you would pick up your bunker fuels, and you would typically pick it up outside. What you will see here is all kind of tankers hanging outside Fujairah. So every vessel has what they call an automated identification system, an AIS system, which is basically a signal to the satellite. And what it says is, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. These signals, you can switch off. In this case, I was suspicious because just before all these vessels, these empty vessels started arriving, I saw in the Metis Gulf, all these Iranian tankers, as kind of a new move, go off radar. Yeah. And they would disappear for a couple days, just for 4 or 5 days, which is just enough to sail to the other ship, pump your oil over, and go back into your own Metis Gulf. Yeah. Now, this operation is meant to disguise where the oil is from and where the oil is going to. If the other vessel already had some, say, Brazilian oil or Venezuelan oil or whatever oil, it then becomes oil with a country of origin that is basically unclear.
It's blended.
It's blended. It could be Mid-East blend. It could be Fujairah crude, as the Iranians sometimes call their oil. Yeah. Could be anything. And so it no longer is Iranian oil.
And what about the front page? The supertanker that on March 16, 2010 set sail for Fujairah, an oil port in neighboring United Arab Emirates.
So the front page started in March of 2010. It began its journey in the port of Fujairah.
Unlike the Iranian tankers, the front page did not turn off its AIS signal, so we can trace the route the ship subsequently covered. We compare the data from the ship's logbooks and the ship's transmitter. The front page arrived in Fujairah on March 16, an oil port in the United Arab Emirates. The moving dots are all the signals sent out by ships in the Persian Gulf and received by satellites. On March 18, the front page arrived in Jebel Dana. According to the ship's logbook, it then set sail for Ras Tanura in Saudi Arabia. But analyzing the data from the transmitter, it turns out the ship crossed the Persian Gulf on March 19 and spent 2 days off the coast of the Iranian port of Asaluye. Before crossing the Persian Gulf again and mooring in Ras Tanura. What was the front page doing off the coast of Iran for 2 days?
The ship tracking records indicated that the hull was like lower in the water than it had been before it arrived, which is a clear indication that it had loaded cargo. And the thing that I found kind of baffling when I did the story was this was perfectly legal business at the time. And yet some companies seem to want to hide it. One of the sources I talked to for my story speculated that Shell sells a lot of gasoline in the States. If it came out that they were buying, Iranian products that are used to refine into gasoline, one might conclude that the gasoline being sold in the States was that the origin was Iran, which would be illegal. There's no proof that that's what was going on, but perhaps Shell thought, well, we don't want anyone even thinking that, so it would be better not to make it obvious that we were continuing to buy Iranian oil.
So the main conclusion was that Shell was one of the last companies to stop trading in Iran oil, basically. They stopped very late in the process. So there is a peculiarity. It's all perfectly legal. They were doing things that were legitimate and legal. But they sort of seems to have waited until the last minute, really, to stop trading with Iran, which explains partly why they're now the one with the largest debt to Iran, because they left so late. So basically what happens next is a different stage. I mean, they were investing in Iran. They could no longer invest in Iran. But they were still buying Iranian crude, which was completely legal as a European company. They were absolutely entitled to buy that crude. And then came the embargo, which basically in that case made it illegal for them to buy Iranian crude, period.
De Europese Unie legt Iran zeer strenge sancties op. Dat hebben de ministers van Buitenlandse Zaken van de EU-landen besloten.
3 months after Shell's last shipment from Iran was concluded, the European Union agreed on a trade embargo, leaving Shell's payments in limbo.
But the problem they had is after the delivery, it would be typically 60 days before you settle your debt for. But then those payments became illegal because they came too late. They sort of collided with the deadline of the embargo. And so Shell was left with the debt it did and it does want to pay, but is not legally allowed to pay because of the European Union sanctions on Iranian oil.
We've seen over the last several years Shell making statements and it being publicly released about ramping up business in Iran, scaling back business in Iran to try to get a bit of a public affairs benefit. And we've even seen fairly elaborate schemes, deals, however you want to call them, to repatriate monies through a grain deal with Cargill.
Well, one very smart idea that was put to them was to swap typically agricultural debts, so debts in goods that were sold to Iran, that Shell would repay them. So Shell would repay the companies that had sold typically wheat to Iran.
We understand from public press reporting, we called out Shell and Cargill. We thought it was inappropriate, that there was going to be a barter arrangement.
Iran owns some money for food. You pay that money, and that way you compensate for your own debt.
So we're not trying to deny important humanitarian goods into Iran, but when you are using the cover of humanitarian aid in order to make good on oil transactions, that's not humanitarian, that's an economic transaction.
And how much money is involved in this debt?
Well, now we've heard lately that it was about $2 billion if you include the interest.
$2 billion?
Yeah.
We opposed the transaction. We called out Shell and Cargill and said that they should not proceed with the transaction.
Why did Shell delay its payment for so long? And why didn't it cut its ties with Iran much earlier?
It does look unusual, but I'm sure if you're Shell and you're dealing with such a giant oil and gas producer, you want to be in good terms if things, improve.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, I would say if you're thinking about the long-term situation as a company, that you had a number of examples of countries that were under embargo. Typically, Libya was one. And then suddenly, the international community strikes a deal with that particular country. And suddenly the country opens up, and then everyone is going to come to you in that country saying, what did you do? How did you behave when we were in trouble? Yeah. And we know Iran, like any other countries that have been sort of suffering isolation, will think, will count its friends. That's why Shell has to at least try to resolve the issue. I don't think it's a matter of planning. I think it's more about keeping your options open. If things improve, you want to maintain a good relationship. So that in 10 years, 20 years, or maybe less, when the international community has completely settled its issues with Iran, it can come back and exploit these giant resources.
Shell is een bedrijf dat denkt op lange termijn. En zij hebben in hun lange geschiedenis de ervaring, regimes komen en regimes gaan. Dictaturen komen, dictaturen gaan. De investeringstermijn waar zij op denken is veel langer dan de gemiddelde levensduur van een regime, en zeker van dictatoriale regimes. Er zijn er maar weinig die het langer dan 25 jaar volhouden. En Shell denkt op dat soort termijnen nog langer. Ja. Dus wat zij doen in landen waar het moeilijk is en ze hun activiteiten moeten terugschroeven, zoals in Iran, proberen ze, zoals ze dat zelf ook noemen, kaarsje brandend te houden. Gewoon toch wat lijntjes open te houden, contacten te houden. En dan op het moment dat er weer wat ruimte is, proberen ze weer wat. Nou, als de deur dan weer dicht gaat, ja, dan, of de politieke omstandigheden veranderen, dan trek je je weer wat terug. Zo gauw er weer ruimte is, ga je er weer in. En zo werkt het met Shell.
Will the changes in Iran and new President Rouhani's overtures to the West open a new window of opportunity for Shell?
The very fact that this was the first communications between an American and Iranian president since 1979 underscores the deep mistrust between our countries, but it also indicates the prospect of moving beyond that difficult history.
How did mining all this data help our investigation?
Data journalism is going to have to face the same challenges as journalism, because when we think in 10, 15, and 25 and 30 years, we're not going to be calling it data journalism anymore. We're going to be calling it journalism.
When I started 15 years ago, the web was just starting. There was very little on the web. And therefore, it was a slower process. You'd have to go to a library, you'd have to go to archives, you'd have to go get people to give you pieces of paper. Now, you may not even have a source as a person. You'd have just a set of tools that brings information very quickly. Things are fast, and you can go deeper.
All we have to do is look at the front pages of most newspapers, and we realize that 9 times out of 10, we're still in an anecdotal journalistic world. The great benefit is that 1 time out of 10, we realize, wow, here's a story that we never would have written in the same way with these same techniques before.
And what's happening to South Pars, that big gas field off the coast of Iran? Since the departure of big international companies in Iran, the Iranians started exploiting South Pars themselves. On YouTube, we find this movie. It's since become a huge hit. Of course, we presented all our findings to Shell. The company made the following statement.
Thank you for watching. For more on this subject, take a look at the playlist. You can also watch this recommended video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and we'll keep you updated on our documentaries.